Okay, good morning everyone. Thanks for joining 9 a.m. theater session. My name's Steve Diceitis. I'm a member of the Windows Fundamentals team. I'm going to embarrass a couple of my colleagues. Suda and Eugene are here with me. So first I wanted to just say if anybody has questions and I can't get to them this morning right after the session, you can certainly email me anytime and I'd be happy to reply to your mail or even set up a follow-up call. I'm also going to be at the Windows 10 booth starting at 10 a.m. So if you want to come over there and have a one-on-one discussion or try to contact me, and we can also meet later in the week. The team I'm part of, as I mentioned, is in Windows Fundamentals. Our team owns a good portion of the Windows Update technology or update stack. And specifically, we own pieces such as the lowest level technology for actually installing different components into the OS. We own the Windows setup program, the reset and recovery experience, if you're familiar with that. We also have tools that we deliver to PC OEMs for helping them provision PCs with Windows 10 on it. So today we're going to talk about Windows 10 Dynamic Update. So who in the audience knows or thinks they know what Windows Dynamic Update is? Does anyone know? We got some over here. My colleagues are not raising their hands, so I'm getting a little bit worried about that. So many of you don't, and so I'm glad you came. And so let's take a look at it. Dynamic sounds like, I don't know, pretty positive word, but what the heck does this mean? These are continuous updates on Windows? Are they energetic updates? So if you're not sure, we're going to cover this in the next 20 minutes. So start with what is Windows 10 Dynamic Update. We'll look at kind of high level, how does it work, what content is acquired and where does it come from. And then we're going to go a little deeper and talk about how do we take this content, and if you're not opting into Dynamic Update, how can you use this to patch your OS installation media? At the end of it, hopefully you're an expert, and we'll go from there. So let's start with what is Dynamic Update. So Dynamic Update really is the acquisition of update content or packages that are, generally speaking, not on the installation media. So when I say the installation media, I mean media you might get from the VLSC site with the OS on it. It's got the sources folder, boot folder, setup.exe, and so on. So this content that we acquire, we do it to make it easier for setup to complete successfully. It also reduces the need to patch on the other side of the feature update. And in addition, it acquires some content that is not on that media. These are features on demand, as well as language packs, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. It's basically applicable for when you launch setup and from the Windows 10 OS. So whether you simply click on setup.exe, maybe you're using Config Manager and you're pushing out a task sequence to do an install. It also even applies in Win 10 or Config Manager when you're doing a software update. Okay, it is also going to be available, or is available, I should say, right now on what we call the pre-UUP software updates. UUP, if you haven't learned, maybe you'll learn more tomorrow in Suma's session, stands for Unified Update Platform. And it's basically the tech that we have right now for doing feature updates for consumer devices. And it hasn't really landed yet for on-prem environments, but it's in a private preview and should be coming very soon. So let's talk about the content that Dynamic Update delivers. So to begin with, for those of you who've looked at the installation media and you've seen setup.exe, Dynamic Update will deliver a new version of setup.exe. So it's sort of just-in-time fixes for the setup program itself. What it'll also do is it'll apply or download updates for the OS that you are moving to. I'll call this the target Windows OS. And specifically, there's a handful of items that get refreshed. These are updates for the Windows pre-installation environment, or WinPE, if you're familiar with that. also for the recovery environment, or WinRE. There's also updates for the Windows servicing components. These are the technology in Windows, let's say, that actually does the installation of features on demand, language packs, cumulative updates, and so forth. So it's an update to the update engine itself. It also pull in driver updates and last but not least, quality updates, or the monthly LCU, latest quality cumulative update. Now, in addition, I mentioned earlier, it also will bring down features on demand and language packs. And so it does this because currently, if you go and do an in-place upgrade from some source Windows 10 to a newer build, right now, because those features on demand or those additional language resources are not on the installation media, those get lost during the migration. So if you had started with ENUS and you added German, you go through the feature update, you don't have German on the other side. Dynamic Update will acquire those during the setup process and preserve those, as well as the language experience features on demands as well, things like text-to-speech and so forth. So let's talk a little bit about what Dynamic Update is not. So first of all, it is not the out-of-box experience 0-day package. That is a mouthful, even for me here at 9 a.m. We call that sometimes Uup ZDP. And you may be familiar with this. You get a brand new computer, it boots up, you're going through the experience for the very first time, and it'll acquire some updates. Those updates are not Windows 10 Dynamic Update. It's what we call Uup ZDP. The other thing it's not Device Setup Manager, or DSM. And this is basically a different service running on the computer that will look at devices and refresh drivers if a driver is missing or it's got a generic driver. So a little bit more about where it's not available. If you boot into WinPE, and run setup there, Dynamic Update's not applicable there. It's also not applicable if you Pixie boot as well. So how does it work? Let me go through the several packages. So early in the Windows setup program, basically setup will go out to Windows Update and attempt to acquire these additional packages. And they map pretty closely to an earlier slide that you saw. The first one it'll acquire is a Setup DU package, and this is updates to the setup program and the DLLs and so forth that setup needs. The second one is what we call Safe OS, or Safe OS DU package, and these are updates needed for the Windows recovery environment. Third one is the servicing stack. I mentioned earlier, this is sort of the lowest level in the OS where updates are applied, and so these are updates, as I said, to that update engine. The fourth one are drivers. These are latest versions of drivers that have been published by OEMs and IHVs. They're published into Windows Update and they're specifically targeted for Dynamic Update. FODs and language packs I just mentioned, but those are required. And then last but not least is the monthly update, the cumulative monthly update. So where it's acquired from, we'll pull these from Windows Update. And I want to make a note of this because the gentleman I was talking to earlier had a question on this. Even if your device is not being managed by Microsoft, let's say you're controlling this through Config Manager, you still have control over the build, the feature update you're going to. So when Dynamic Update is enabled and we're acquiring some last minute just-in-time updates or patches, it still preserves the OS version that you're going. So Dynamic Update will not bring you to a more recent feature update than what you've decided if you're going through Config Manager. What it will do though is bring down these additional patches. So you're not losing control of the feature update from that point of view. It'll also acquire it through Config Manager and WSUS today with our UUP private preview. And then lastly, these packages are also available on the Microsoft Update catalog, and I'll show you a little bit on how you acquire those. So you might be thinking to yourself, hopefully at this time, Dynamic Update seems like it has a lot of advantages. Preserves my languages, preserves my optional features, it gets me current in one step, It actually fixes, possibly bugs with the servicing stack itself. How do I get this? Well, the good news is at the moment it's enabled by default, but for some of the commercial customers I talk to, they may have endpoints that do not have internet connectivity, and they may want to actually turn this off. Or they may not like the fact that we will pull the latest monthly update. So if they're planning a deployment and they've been testing with a particular previous monthly update, they may not want to be surprised and pull down the latest when we ship it. So those would be a couple reasons why you may want to disable it. So you can disable it programmatically a few different ways. If you're programming a setup.exe directly, there are command line switches to disable it there. And similarly, if you're using a setup configuration file, there are settings within there to turn it off. If you go with an unintended answer file, there is also the ability to enable or disable it through that answer file itself. For users that are actually interacting with the setup experience itself, they also can opt out. Currently, it is enabled by default and recommended. And when they see this screen, although I don't think it says anywhere on here, Windows 10 Dynamic Update, this is Dynamic Update, and by turning this off, consumer would basically turn off the packages I just mentioned. So that said, I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about the case where you have the installation media. Maybe you have it from right when we shipped, and I often get the question, how do you take this media and keep it current? I know some will simply grab the latest quality update and simply apply it, but I don't know that we've been that good about explaining all of the detailed steps that we do in Dynamic Update to allow you to be able to manually do this or automate it yourself and not do it on the client. So I want to take you through the steps to do that. And then we'll end with some PowerShell code to show you some of the moving parts. So to get started with this, you basically need the patches to apply. And the way you can go get those here is out under catalog.microsoft.update.com. And unfortunately, you'll need a little bit of creative searching to find these updates, and I'll show you. Right now, I've put into the search box 1809 Dynamic Update, and I've got some search results that have come down. In the search results, it looks like I have the SafeOS update, but it's unclear if I've got the other patches that I want. And so the way to really query this, unfortunately right now, the way this content is published, you're going to need to actually look at 3 different fields out under Microsoft Catalog. The title, the product, and the description. So if you're looking for, first also let me say, all of this content is cumulative in nature. So you really are only looking for the latest version of each one of those. So start with setup DU. The title in this will contain Dynamic Update. You'll actually have to click on it and look in the description, and it'll call out that it is a setup update. For SafeOS DU, that is actually listed in the product string, so you should be able to find that pretty quickly. The servicing stack update is also called out in the title, so you may need to query a couple times to pull these. And then most of you probably are familiar with how to get the latest cumulative update, and that's simply cumulative update for Windows 10 right there in the title. So once you've acquired those, so those are a good part of Dynamic Update. What's not out there are the language packs and the features on demand, and those are shipped on separate ISO images that you can get out under VLSC. Okay, everybody with me so far? Okay. Let's move on to the steps. This is where it gets kind of busy. So what we've tried to do is highlight in one slide what are the steps to do, in what order, and where do these apply. So every row basically represents a task to apply these images to, or apply these content to. Now I want to just clarify a little bit. Installing, let's say, a second or a third language, or installing a different additional optional features is not necessarily patching your OS image, right? Because you may be fine with the default language from the media that you have. But because we know some of our commercial customers are doing this, we added this into the slide to show you those steps because the sequencing really matters. So if you're patching and you have no plans to add a language or additional optional feature, you can just ignore these pieces and you probably save 10 or 11 steps on the patching process itself. So it all really begins with the recovery environment, and I'm not sure if you can read this, but this is basically winre.wim. That's the file. And the pattern goes something like this, and you'll see this on the additional columns. The pattern basically starts out with the most foundational piece, the servicing stack update package. We want you to apply that first, followed by any languages that you're going to add, followed by any additional optional components that you might add. And then it kind of wraps up with number one, applying either the LCU or the setup dynamic update package, and then doing some image cleanup. This image cleanup will remove any redundant components in the OS itself, and the export step will actually do some cleanup on the WIM file itself and make that as small as possible. So that's the pattern. We actually repeat a very similar pattern for WinPE, and specifically the file here is boot.wim. And the way this works is we basically mount that image, we apply those packages in the same order, dismount the image, and then do some cleanup on the image. And we'll do this a very similar pattern here on the main OS. The main OS, in this case, the file that you're going to be patching is going to be in the sources folder as install.wim. The recovery one I should have mentioned earlier. To get access to that, you've got to boot or mount install.wim and grab the recovery image out of System32. And then last but not least, there's one step for setup dynamic update. And this is a really easy step. These are updates to setup.exe and the corresponding files. This is a simple expansion of that package into the new media or your OS installation media right into sources. So pretty straightforward. So at this point, we're going to go to steps 26 through 50. I'm just kidding. This is it's really busy, all this patching, and I recognize that. So, where possible, just let our code do this in setup and it'll just happen automatically. But if you need to do this patching yourself, in preparation for your rollout, these are the steps you would do. So let's go ahead and move on. So now we're going to have about 300 lines of PowerShell, and hopefully everybody can read this. But seriously, we're not going to go through all this PowerShell, but I'll walk you through a few of the highlights. But I do want to remind everybody, we did go live with a blog today that has the entire PowerShell script out there. The blog title is at the end, but you'll be able to just copy and paste it and try it out yourself. So to get started with this, we basically declare a lot of variables up front. The big ones really are, we're going to mount the language ISO, language pack ISO, the FOD ISO, have a lot of local variables for some of the language resources that are on that ISO, on the language ISO. We're also going to have some variables here for the packages that we're going to apply, and some variables really for when we mount those images, where are they going to be mounted on our PC so we can do the application of it. Once we do that, we will simply, let's see here. We'll go ahead down here in this step. The way I wrote this script is we will start with the original installation media and just leave it intact. So I make a copy of it, make sure that it's not read-only. That way you can apply this. If something goes wrong, you have the original media and nothing's there. Nothing's harmed. But it really kind of starts down here where we will go ahead and mount install.wim, which is on the your media sources folder, and mount that, and from there we can start applying patches. And so once we've mounted that, as I mentioned, we will grab the recovery image, winre.wim, we'll save that, and then go ahead and start adding packages. And the way we do that is pretty simple. We'll use the add Windows package with the particular package that we're trying to apply, and that will add it. And the rest of this gets into a lot of the nitty-gritty around applying languages. So I'm not going to attempt to walk you through all this lines of PowerShell, but it is on the web today, I think from this morning. It's on the Windows 10 IT Pro blog. And the title of it is called Updating Windows 10 Media with Dynamic Update Packages. So kind of, let me give a quick summary and then I'll be available for some questions. To begin with, Dynamic Update, as I mentioned, helps set up, increases the likelihood that it's going to successfully complete setup. Whoa. It also reduces the need on the other side of the feature update for having to pull down more updates. The cumulative update is a good example. By enabling Dynamic Update today, prior to going with UUP, all of your optional features and your language resources will automatically migrate over. It can be disabled. So for some of you that cannot do that on the client, you have option to disable this programmatically. The content is acquired through Windows Update, also can be acquired through Config Manager and WSUS when you move to UUP on-prem. And these packages, as I mentioned, are also available in the catalog to be able to get downloaded. So, as I mentioned, we do have a blog went out today. That's where the PowerShell script is. The PowerShell script will add one additional optional language. I think it's Japanese. It'll also bring in fonts for that language and so forth. So hopefully the PowerShell script will be a good source if you choose to automate this yourself, or if you've got automation in place, you can use it to check if you're missing any steps. So real quick, I want to highlight this year at Ignite, we've brought a lot of folks from fundamentals and from the servicing group, and so they have sessions going on. Vivek has one coming up probably in 20 or 30 minutes on understanding 1909 and some of the changes with 1909. Tomorrow, Suma has a breakout of all the improvements that we're doing on the Windows Update stack itself. And for those that are interested in more talk about multilingual deployments, Suda will be having a theater session on that as well. There is also a rich set of interactive sessions. I don't know if these are still open, but these are basically 75-minute sessions for a roundtable discussion to talk about basically feature updates and quality updates. They're kind of limited in terms of how many participants. Then lastly, don't miss the learning track on Thursday, deploying, managing, and servicing Windows, Office, and all of your devices. Feel free to drop by the Windows 10 booth, talk to any of the subject matter experts there. I'll be there at 10 o'clock this morning. And I think I handed out stickers to many of you. If you have 2 stickers, then you will bring it over to the Windows 10 booth, and I think you get this. No, this is not the gift. It's a different gift. I guess there's no gift on here. I guess it'll be a surprise. Thank you very much. I know this was kind of low level. Hopefully the blog will be a little easier to read than the PowerShell on the screen, and if anybody's got questions, I'd be glad to talk with you offline. Thank you very much.